Hello, welcome back to Shocks Talks. Thank you so much for being here. I brought out this globe today because I just got it in the mail and I am just really excited to have it. And I figured I'd show you some places we're going to talk about today on this globe. We're going to look at an event that occurred in Melbourne, Australia. We're going to talk about a sighting that happened in Zimbabwe. And we're also going to talk about the Belgian Wave, all the way up here, Belgium, the Belgian Wave of the 90s. So, I know you can't see it that great, but I wanted to have something physical that I could look at while I'm thinking about all of this stuff. And I guess I'm just sick of doing everything in computers all the time. So happy to have a globe now. And before I do my intro, I also wanted to show you the books we're going to be talking about today. We've talked about this one a lot. This is Leslie Kean's book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. And remember, Leslie Kean is the one who broke the article in the New York Times back in 2017. And that really got the ball rolling with all the stuff that's happening today in the Congress. Her book is really cool. And this is another one I've been talking about a lot. This is Richard Dolan's book. It's UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. And I'm going to be quoting some passages from here today. And then a book I don't think we've looked at yet together. This is Chosen. And the author is Yvonne Smith. And she's a pretty famous hypnotherapist. And I got to see her speak at Contact in the Desert. This book is full of a lot of transcripts from her sessions, as well as drawings and photographs that people have given her or made in relationship to their abduction experiences. So we'll get into all that in some later episodes. Right now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a recap. I've made 6 videos so far. I have 3 more planned for this UFO timeline. So our timeline goes from 1947 up to the present day, and each episode has been covering something major. There's a lot of other stuff that we haven't covered, but from each decade, sort of. And after we complete this quick timeline, I'm going to branch out for a little bit and do a couple episodes that cover some different topics like critical thinking as it relates to all of this. And we'll probably talk more about Tom Campbell's model for consciousness and meditation, the world of thought, remote viewing, psi abilities. And then after this little break from UFOs, I want to get right back into the alien topic, this time with a deeper dive into contact and abduction, as well as various theories around alien agendas. And for that, we'll definitely be looking at Richard Dolan's book, Alien Agendas. I'm also probably going to pull stuff from Making Contact, which is a collection of different essays that came out just a year or 2 ago, I think. So it's going to be really interesting. And today we're in the 90s in our timeline, so I'll continue to provide you with a grounding context for the rest of what we're going to get into. This episode, like I said, is going to be a big kind of catch-up overview. What have we learned so far? So because of the secrecy, the disinformation and stigma around this topic, because of the way our news outlets operate, because it's a really weird thing to think about in relationship to our daily lives, and it can even be scary, it seems that many people still live in a state of denial when it comes to UFOs. Again, this is by design, at least to some extent, and it needs to change now. In order to overcome the fear and the programming, I'm going through big highlights slowly, and there may be some repetition because that's one of the things that helps me to wrap my mind around all of this. And that's a huge part of why I'm doing this channel. In case I haven't said it before, I've been learning about this stuff, studying it, listening to different people talk and podcasts and videos for over a decade now, and so much just slips through the cracks of my mind. So I wanted to do this kind of book report for myself in the form of these YouTube videos because it's helping me map it all out, and it's just literally the most fun, like, for me. So I had an interesting moment the other day where I was reading from Chosen by Yvonne Smith, the book I just showed you, and I got a little triggered. I could have been flashing back to some of my own traumatic experiences, some of which are purely human related, and some maybe other. I could have been picking up on the energy in the words that I was reading because they were from transcripts of hypnosis sessions, and it's also possible that I could have been letting my imagination run so wild that it caused a partial shutdown of other processing centers in my brain. You know, like when you freak yourself out. So what this all resulted in was a weird shift in my mood that felt almost like a full-on personality switch. All of a sudden, all of this UFO stuff seemed crazy to me. I was flooded with self-doubt and insecurity, and I even thought making this channel seemed like a total mistake. I worried about how weird and dumb I must seem, and a bunch of other nonsense thoughts passed through my mind. Luckily for me, my house is full of books now, books by people who have dedicated their lives to exploring these strange territories of existence. I have the internet to help me easily access videos, interviews, podcasts, and articles about UFOs and all the rest of the strangeness. And I happened upon a clip with Jeremy Corbell, who was speaking to this very thing. I later heard him play a part of that same clip on the latest Weaponized episode. So if you want to hear it, it's deep in that episode, but you can check that out. So in this clip that I saw, I think it was just on TikTok, he was talking to a news reporter, and she was saying really rude things like about tinfoil hats and some jokes about how the aliens are coming and it's blah, 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 you know, just nonsense. And he just flattened her. And I mean, he just told her straight up, this is no joke. There is an overwhelming amount of evidence. The government just told us they are now aware of craft, reverse engineering programs, and bodies. Non-human biologics. People are working really hard to follow through with all that needs to happen next, and this has all been going on for a very long time. Corbell is someone who continues to stay in this sober mindset when it comes to all this, and I find it very interesting. Mainly because it seems that we live in a time where the way our minds operate is being heavily influenced by the media we greedily consume, the devices we are interacting with on a daily basis, and social and emotional waves in the collective consciousness. So this is the kind of stuff we'll talk about more in the mind-focused episodes that are coming up. I'm using this series, like I said before, as a way to teach myself about things that want to slip through the cracks in my mind. I'm trying to remind myself through commitment and consistency that this topic is important to me and might be very important to the entire planet very soon. So a quote from UFOs for the 21st Century Mind by Richard Dolan. Ronald Rager, a former employee of the aerospace firm Aerojet, accidentally but legally came into possession of an important database of the Defense Satellite Program, or DSP. This is a satellite made by Aerojet for military espionage purposes. The database was a list of objects known as fast walkers, which were tracked by the DSP satellites. Fast walkers, of course, is a term for space-based UFOs. The DSP database listed 283 fast walkers recorded from the years 1973 to 1991, an average of more than one per month. So let's get into our big recap. UFO sightings are happening around the world. The US government, other governments around the world, and many programs, both private and public, have been working to understand this phenomena since the 1940s at least. Abduction and contact is an aspect of this phenomena, along with crop circles, animal mutilations, mental downloads, healings, and more. Some people who have had abduction experiences have suffered greatly due to the denial of this aspect of reality by the culture at large, You can imagine how insane it would feel to have an experience that is so out of the realm of everyone else's reality that you can't even talk to anyone about it. So some people have had really beautiful contact experiences and have benefited so much from their contact that it's completely life-altering for them in a good way. Right now, we're in August 2023, and this is a huge moment in history for the recognition and acknowledgement of UFOs by the US government. And go ahead and look up the July 26th UAP hearing, or go back to my episode on that if you haven't gotten into it yet. Some people seem to be able to contact or call in UFOs and orbs. You can look up Chris Blesdo and Stephen Greer, and there are others as well. UFOs appear and behave in many different ways. Some are silent, some are making thundering noises, some have lights, some hide in cloud forms, some are eggs, some are orbs, some are discs, triangles. These are the shapes, plasma ships, squid-like, octopus-like plasma ships. Some have been described as pancake-shaped, pyramids, the cube in a clear sphere, tic-tacs, and more. Some have beings in them that can be seen by those observing. Some go into the ocean, some go into space. Some seem to just phase out, like disappear in an instant. Some make really fast maneuvers that nothing we know of can accomplish in current human technology. And some seem to play games with Air Force pilots. Some have even fired light beams, and some hover for impossible amounts of time. There aren't many reports of aggression, but I have heard a few stories of different types of military people from around the world who have fired at the UFOs, and then in return they've been fired back at, usually by some kind of laser beam. I have not heard any story or report of a UFO initiating this type of interaction, but only responding to it. There is a definite correlation between UFOs and nuclear test sites, as well as war zones, and there are also reports of UFOs showing up more in certain areas which are considered to be UFO hotspots. There is a link between the UFO and contact, abduction phenomena, and telepathy, and remote viewing, as well as other psi abilities, sometimes like the ability to heal or even just self-heal. And finally, there is an ancient global history of UFOs and non-human beings, which we haven't even started talking about yet on this channel. So we started our timeline at 1947. There's so much before that, but I wanted to stick with what was relevant to, really relevant to current events. And maybe we'll go back in time later on. So in the same book by Richard Dolan, UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, he estimates that there may be, on average, 25 to 30 genuine sightings each day of what we may reasonably describe as non-human technology. That seems extraordinary, and it is. And I just want to say that calculation, in his book, he goes into detail about like how he came to those numbers, the different reporting databases, how many of those reports are debunked, because there are people who see things and think they're a UFO and they're wrong. But like when you really filter through all of that and get down to like what are the most credible and like unexplained reports, that's when you get to this number. And that's 25 to 30 genuine sightings every day that we know of. And at the Contact in the Desert lecture that I went to with Richard Dolan, it was really interesting because he asked everyone in the audience in this big lecture hall, how many of you have seen a UFO? And pretty much everyone raised their hand in that room. And then he asked the question, how many of you have reported it? And almost all the hands went down. And just a handful were left, like 5 to 10 people maybe had reported. So that was just like a really good visual understanding of like these sightings are happening all the time. all around the world by tons of people, and many of them are just not being reported. Now, if you have a sighting that you want to report, you can always go to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and you can make a report there if you don't have another outlet for that. That's like a thing that's been going on for a long time, and I have a feeling we'll see more reporting systems in the near future. So in the last episode, I mentioned that I would cover some of these school sightings. They're just really interesting. So we have the Zimbabwe sighting in the 1990s. In this incident, over 60 children in the town of Ruwa, Zimbabwe on September 16th, 1994. All the children were outside at recess, and weirdly, they were alone. There were no adults with them at that time. The adults were in some kind of meeting, I think, inside. The children were running around. They saw a craft land during recess and 3 to 4 beings beside it, and one of them was perched on top of it. Harvard psychologist Dr. John Mack interviewed many of the children, and they described the same thing. The first link below is a link to a video of some of those interviews. You can see the kids talking about their experiences, and it's very interesting. So please check it out. This is a famous incident. On Richard Dolan's YouTube channel, this episode is called South Korean UFOs. He speaks with Jin Woo Yu. Jin Woo tells of a case from 1973 where a class of young children saw a UFO, and there were around 50 witnesses, including the teacher in this case. And you can hear all about the details in the interview, which I also linked below. But some interesting points. It was a disc that they saw, but some children described it as coming out of a cloud. So one big cloud split apart into 6 small clouds. Those clouds combined into one and then divided into two clouds, which dissipated to reveal the 2 discs. There were also colored lights reported that were red that changed to a silver light. And then there's Westall High in Melbourne, Australia. So Wednesday, April 6, 1966, around 200 students and teachers were at recess, and they witnessed a UFO. The teacher was warned never to tell anyone, and he was told he was wrong and drunk on duty by military personnel who visited him after the sighting. And there's a link below to a news story on this. I can't believe I forgot to point to South Korea on the map at the beginning of this episode, but that's the 3 major school sightings. So we have Zimbabwe, South Korea, and Melbourne, Australia. And now we'll get into our event for the 90s timeline. And this is the UAP wave over Belgium. And this is from Leslie Kean's book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. On November 29th, 1989, a total of 143 sightings were reported in one small area. At least 250 people described extraordinary UAP activity, with most reports occurring after sunset. At 5:15, 2 federal policemen saw a triangular object with 3 spotlights beaming down and a red flashing light at the center. It remained over the town of UPenn for approximately 30 minutes, then it moved over a lake where it hovered for about an hour. At about 6:45, the policemen saw a second craft, dome-like on top. There was another report of a craft that they went to see and followed for a while. This one emitted some kind of red light ball, which they chased and followed, but ended up losing sight of. And there were a total of 13 policemen who reported seeing the craft at about 8 different locations. Many civilians also saw them. A total of 70 reported sightings made on November 29th were fully investigated, and none of these sightings could be explained. There were more sightings in December, in April, March, and July. Of the approximately 2,000 reported cases registered during the Belgian Wave, 650 were investigated, So that's just the amount out of 2,000 that they looked into, and more than 500 of those remain unexplained. Not one aggressive or hostile act was noted. The objects did not try to hide, and in some instances, they moved toward the observers. So this is over the course of about 7 to 8 months. 2,000 cases were reported in Belgium. This is why it's called the Belgian Wave. So much activity in one place, none of it hostile. Okay, so that's probably a good amount of information for today. I showed you the books, and I have all kinds of links below as always. Thank you so much for joining me on Shocks Talks. And please, if you're willing to support, like the video, share it with people that you think would find it interesting, subscribe if you want to know when more videos come out. You can do the bell notification thing, and feel free to leave some comments, and maybe we can get a little conversation going with other people that are watching these. My very small audience right now, but let's get it going. So as we get into the next episode, it's going to be the second to last episode of this 9-episode series of our timeline, and then we will branch out from there into all those other topics that I talked about at the beginning of this. So thank you so much again for taking the time to listen to all of this, and I'll see you next time on Shocks Talks.